Chapter 15. They'd fallen asleep in a tangle of limbs and awoken in the late afternoon, warm and sated. Jake's hands roved over her every inch, and his soft sucking kisses were drugging her, tugging at her heart, making her fall in love. "Dex!" She jolted out of her stupor. "Is he still locked in the laundry room?" "He has food and water," Jake said, nudging his erect cock into her hip. She rolled away, giggling at his exaggerated groan. "I'm getting cock-blocked by that dog again." Tugging on Jake's abandoned shirt, Mac headed through the house to the dog, who was happily curled up on a haphazard pile of what looked like freshly laundered clothes pulled from a nearby basket. "Sorry, Quinn." "Come here, boy. Who's a good boy?" she crooned as he leaped to his feet, pushing his head against her palm. "Come on, let's go get Jake." Dex padded behind her as she made her way back to the bedroom, heading straight for a tidy pile of Quinn's clothes folded on a chair. Nosing them into a heap onto the carpet, he circled 3 times and settled down, his eyes already closing in contentment. Jake was sitting on the edge of the bed, clad only in his boxers, his feet planted wide on the floor. Shaking his head at the dog, he motioned Mac closer. "Come here, baby girl. I missed you." "I was gone for 2 minutes," she said, but obligingly straddled him to snuggle into his lap, her arms wrapping around his shoulders and her lips finding his. She could definitely give Dex a run for his money in the contentment stakes. At that thought, she stiffened. "I'm fooling around with my best friend's little brother, and the world is falling apart." "Hey, where'd you go?" Jake murmured into her neck. "This is wrong. When everything—" She gestured to the window, at a loss for words. Succumbing to the desire between them had been successful at blocking out reality. But now, those with symptoms were diverted onto school buses and taken to the hospital. That's where they've set up quarantine. Rachel's words swamped like murky water. "I didn't ask if they'd seen my dad. They would have said if they knew anything. I don't even know why I care. It's not like I even speak to him anymore." "When did you see him last?" She shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "What do you think is going to happen?" she asked quietly. His arms tightened around her waist. "We're going to stay safe, and eventually the virus will run its course. Or they'll come up with a vaccine." "Why do you think we didn't get it? The virus? It was everywhere. I still can't believe how crazy it was out there." Soft tears were tracking down her cheeks, and Jake pulled back to look directly at her when she sniffed. "I guess we got lucky, or we're immune. Who knows?" he answered. "You know what I do know. You need a hot shower." Mackenzie sniffed again. "Is that your way of telling me I smell?" "It's my way of looking after you. Come on, I'll get it started for you." "You're not joining me?" He got to his feet, hoisting her easily with his hands beneath her ass and her legs still wrapped around his waist. "I'm pretty sure I could be persuaded." He grinned. Closing her eyes under the cascade of water, Mac gave herself over to Jake, over to the idea of them. Her hands roamed his wet skin, tracing the veins in his biceps, the tight curve of his ass, the dip in his navel. She wanted him. All of him, and she wanted to forget. Dropping to her knees, she thrilled at his hands tangling desperately in her wet hair. He was hot and salty, and Mackenzie worked her mouth over his hard length, stopping to swirl her tongue at his sensitive tip and lap at the purling pre-cum before swallowing as deep as she could. Jake's hips bucked in response and she gagged, pulling back only to bob down again, sucking feverishly. Pumping her fist in rhythm with her mouth, she set a punishing pace. Unable to get enough of the absolute power she brandished, she might be the one on her knees, but the knowledge he was completely within her control was dizzying. "Fuck, Mac. Babe, I'm going to—" His hands tugged in warning, but Mac grinned around her mouthful. This man was hers, and she wanted every part of him. "Mackenzie Lyons, get your ass back in here," Jake demanded gruffly, watching her through the doorway from a sprawled position on the bed. "Patience is a virtue, you know," she said, drying her hair. "A virtue I've used up. And Mac, ditch the towel. Mackenzie halted in the action of wrapping the towel around her body and smiled slowly. Shaking back her hair, she turned to hang it up, before letting it slip from her fingers and glancing over her shoulder to catch his eyes. Oops. Bending from the hips, she wiggled her butt as she picked up the towel, smirking at the strangled groan coming from the bedroom. I swear to God, Mackenzie. The need-saturating Jake's voice was a magnet, drawing her to him. Mac didn't stop moving when she got to the bed, climbing on and laughing at the way his eyes latched on her bouncing breasts. His big hands cupped her as his thumbs caressed across her nipples, causing her to gasp. His hands were large, square, and capable. Working hands that had slightly rough abrasions on the pads of his fingers, causing a delicious friction that had her grinding down on his already thickening cock. Jake, I need you. Now, Mackenzie said. What was that you were saying about patience? He ducked his head to capture a nipple in his mouth and sucked deep. She bucked, her core slippery with the need to have him inside her. She appreciated that Jake wasted no time in sheathing his cock, and then she was sinking onto his lap, hovering millimeters from satisfaction. Dex growled, and Mackenzie saw he'd raised his head. She paused. Now you're slowing down? He asked. Did you hear that? She cocked her head to the side. Did we lock the front door? Townsend himself could be on the doorstep. I don't give a fuck. I need inside you, baby girl. No, seriously. The dog shot to his feet, barking as he raced from the room. Fuck, that's Quinn. Jake groaned, clenching his hands in frustration on her hips. Hurry, he'll use his key if we don't answer. Mackenzie and Jake arrived at the front door, breathless and rumpled, opening it to find Quinn patting down his pockets, no doubt looking for his keys. There's a dog in my house? Quinn asked, looking pointedly at the now quietened Dex. Took you long enough, said Tom Brenner, stepping forward with his AK-47 held purposefully, adding extra menace to a man who already exuded plenty. Jesus, Tom, put the rifle down, said Quinn. They're not sick, see? He gestured. Come with us. Tom grunted. Sure, once you put your weapon away, Jake said with a deceptive calm. The rigidity of his stance didn't lessen until Tom reluctantly lowered the rifle. It hasn't been 48 hours. What changed your mind? There was a blunt edge to Jake's question, and Mackenzie placed a warning hand onto his arm. It probably wasn't the wisest idea to piss off an armed man. Council has called a town meeting, mandatory attendance, explained Quinn, and it's been 24 hours. If you're not sick now, chances are you're not going to be. Okay, Mackenzie stepped from behind Jake, but I'm bringing my dog. Quinn raised his eyebrows. Your neighbor's dog, she amended, reaching down to pet Dex, who was leaning against her leg after having been reassured they weren't under attack. He's Stacy's. Was Stacy's. Quinn grimaced. I saw her getting on the bus to the hospital. I don't give a damn about the mutt, Tom snapped. You've got 5 minutes to grab your stuff, and then we're leaving. He stalked back to the SUV. Quinn's eyes caught and held Jake's, a silent communication going on between them. Mackenzie watched Jake's shoulders finally loosen before he turned to her. Let's get our things. It was a short and silent trip as they followed Tom and Quinn into the safe zone, with their vehicles waved through a checkpoint of sorts before parking outside the town hall. Small groups of people were making their way into the meeting, and suddenly Mackenzie's nerves had nothing to do with the crisis and everything to do with this town and her history with it. Bitterness had a taste, and she swallowed convulsively. Sanford was a small town with a long memory, and most of the population had no problem transferring her father's sins onto her shoulders. It didn't matter that she'd never passed out drunk in public, borrowed money with no intention of repaying, or whored around breaking up marriages. It didn't even matter that she had the endorsement of the town's golden girl, Chloe. Although, to be fair, Kat's antics probably negated any favorable feelings that association with Chloe provided. No, Mackenzie herself didn't matter in the slightest, All the townspeople saw was the daughter of Carl Lyons, the high school football star turned alcoholic, who'd slept with more women, married and otherwise, than anyone was comfortable discussing. Who was she kidding? They loved talking about how much better they were than him. Snide comments, obvious snubs, hurtful jokes, she'd endured them all. There was a reason she didn't come home often. Wondering if she'd see her father inside town hall, she decided she didn't care either way. They hadn't seen each other in years. From the time she'd turned 12, she'd spent more nights on the rollaway bed in Chloe's room than in her own house. "You good?" Jake asked, tucking her against his side as they walked through the imposing double doors, decks tight on their heels. "Just. This town." Mac sighed. Jake squeezed her in response, apparently well aware of her feelings. It was flustering, the way he knew her, as though he didn't so much know her past as he knew her memories. She had a sudden thought that the reality of her couldn't live up to the depth of his love, because she had no doubt he thought it was love, and she knew she couldn't possibly inspire such devotion. They walked past a small group of middle-aged women in a row of seats, one of whom was her father's neighbor, who promptly turned her back. "Ignore her," Jake murmured, leading her onward. "I hope these people go to church because I don't want them in hell with me." His laughter was a rich, low baritone that did funny things to her stomach. "Jake, Mackenzie, over here," called Chloe, waving at them from where she was already sitting with Rachel and Kat. An immediate flash of guilt stung Mackenzie at the sight of her best friend, knowing what had transpired between her and Jake. How on earth was she going to have that conversation with Chloe? They barely had time for quick hugs before Mayor Townsend, an imposing man with a chiseled jaw and barrel chest, called the meeting to order. "It's a sad day to be standing before you," he said, "as your leader and defender, and see our population so decimated. Make no mistake. These are grave times, and it's going to take strength and drastic measures to see us through." Jesus, has he always been so self-important? Mackenzie whispered to Kat, whose snort of amusement earned them glares from the row in front. "The council and I are meeting tomorrow to draw up new laws, which will be implemented accordingly," Townsend continued. "In the meantime, I need several men to volunteer to go on a raid tomorrow to get supplies for the town." "A raid?" Mackenzie's forehead creased. Rachel had the same reaction, and she wasn't afraid to put it into words. Her hand shot into the air. "I understand we need to get supplies, but do we really need to call it a raid? That sounds overly aggressive." "You're a woman, and I wouldn't expect you to understand. But aggression is the way of the world now, Missy," Townsend stated, his voice dripping in condescension. Rachel leaped to her feet. "Don't call me Missy, and this town is going to operate on order," Townsend spoke over her, aided by the microphone, "and anyone who interrupts will be removed." "This is a meeting, not an assembly for a dictator," Rachel yelled back. "Charles, remove her." Townsend waved an unconcerned hand in Rachel's direction and continued to strategize a raid on their nearest neighboring town. Mackenzie hid a grin as Rachel raised an imperious eyebrow at the man who came to escort her out. "Seriously, Charlie? You've been my mother's assistant for almost a decade, and now you're his lackey?" "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Charles Nixon said, glancing back toward Townsend. "Oh, don't worry. We'll gladly leave this shit show." Kat pulled Mackenzie and Chloe to their feet. "For anyone who wants to join us later, we'll be at the Strumpet." She winked at the gaping mouths surrounding them.